They say marriage is built on love, but what happens when love fades into routine? When passion turns into quiet resignation? That's where I found myself. Before we get into the details, write in the comments where you're watching this video from. My name is Emily, and I've been married to Tom for 7 years. We live in a charming house in Austin, Texas, a house with a spacious backyard, perfect for summer barbecues we no longer host. Outside, the streets pulse with life, yet inside, silence stretches between us, thick and suffocating, like the heavy air before a storm. Tom wasn't always this way. There was a time when he would walk through the door with a bouquet in his hands, his eyes lighting up the moment they met mine. He used to kiss me like he'd been waiting all day for it. But as the years passed, those gestures faded. Now, he spends his evenings hunched over his laptop, barely glancing up to acknowledge my presence. Conversations revolve around groceries, bills, and schedules. Never dreams, never feelings. We share space, yet we might as well be living in separate worlds. The other night, I stood by the window, watching the last rays of sunlight stretch across the rooftops, bleeding into the horizon. From the other room, I could hear the rhythmic tapping of Tom's fingers on his keyboard, a sound that, somehow, mirrored the dull ache in my chest. I tried to remember the last time we had a real conversation, the kind that made me feel connected to him. But the memories felt distant, blurred by time and indifference. A tear slipped down my cheek before I even realized I was crying. That's the thing about loneliness. It creeps in slowly, settling in the cracks of your life until one day, you wake up and realize you're drowning in it. I had everything I once wanted, a stable marriage, a beautiful home, security, but it felt like I was suffocating under the weight of it all. One evening, Tom came home later than usual. His tie was loosened, his face weary. "Work ran late," he muttered, not even looking at me.
"No keys. No worms."
Just a brief glance before he disappeared upstairs, leaving me alone in the quiet hum of our house. I sat there, gripping my wine glass, the silence pressing in on me. I wanted to scream, to shake him, to make him see me again. But instead, I just sat there, swallowing the lump in my throat and letting the emptiness take over. The next day, my best friend Hannah called. "Emily, where have you been? We haven't seen you in weeks," she said, her voice filled with concern. "Come over for dinner tomorrow."
No excuses.
Hannah had always been my anchor, the person who kept me grounded. She and her husband, Michael, were the kind of couple that made love look effortless. They finished each other's sentences, laughed like teenagers, and moved through life as if they were still caught in the honeymoon phase. Being around them used to inspire me. Now, it just reminded me of everything my own marriage lacked. Still, I agreed. Maybe spending time with them would help me remember what love was supposed to feel like. When I arrived at their home, warmth enveloped me instantly. The scent of garlic and roasted tomatoes filled the air. Michael greeted me at the door with a smile, a glass of wine already in his hand. "Emily, it's been too long," he said, his voice rich with familiarity. Hannah pulled me into a hug, her laughter as bright as ever. "Come on, let's eat. Michael made his famous pasta tonight." As we sat around their table, I watched them, how they teased each other, how Michael brushed a stray curl from Hannah's face, how she leaned into him effortlessly. I tried to ignore the hollow ache in my chest. Michael turned to me, his eyes warm. "How's work? Still reading anything interesting?" His tone was genuine, his interest real. I hesitated, caught off guard. When was the last time Tom had asked me something that wasn't out of obligation? When was the last time anyone had truly cared about my answer? The night stretched on, filled with laughter and stories, but something inside me felt restless. After dinner, while Hannah was upstairs putting the kids to bed, Michael and I sat in the living room. The air between us was different, charged in a way I couldn't define. "You okay, Emily?" he asked, his voice softer now. I hesitated, torn between honesty and habit. But something about Michael made me feel safe, seen in a way I hadn't been in years. "I don't know. I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. He studied me for a moment before nodding. It's okay to feel lost sometimes. Life can get heavy. His words lingered, settling in my chest. It wasn't flirtation. It wasn't anything improper, but it was attention. And attention was something I hadn't felt in a long time. That night, lying awake in bed, I replayed the evening in my mind. Tom was beside me, his back turned, lost in sleep. My thoughts kept drifting to Michael. The way he listened, the way he spoke, the way his eyes held a quiet understanding. And that's when the first crack in my resolve appeared. Hannah and Michael had the kind of marriage I had once dreamed of. Their home in Cedar Park, just outside of Austin, was straight out of a magazine. Large windows that bathed the rooms in golden sunlight, a fireplace that crackled warmly in the evenings, and walls covered in family photos, evidence of a life built on love. But it wasn't just the house. It was them. Hannah's laughter had a way of filling a room, her presence effortlessly bright. And Michael, he was steady, kind, and attentive. Watching them felt like watching a romantic movie I used to adore but could no longer relate to. Lately, though, being around them had stirred something uncomfortable in me. I would sit on their plush couch, sipping wine, as Hannah told stories about their weekend hikes or Michael's latest culinary experiment, and something in my chest would tighten. Michael made an incredible paella last weekend, Hannah said one night, turning to him with admiration. It was the best I've ever had. You're exaggerating, he chuckled. I am not, she insisted. Emily, we should do a cooking night soon. You'll love it. I forced a smile. That sounds great. But the truth was, I couldn't remember the last time Tom and I had cooked together. Meals in our house were functional, not shared experiences. Sitting there, watching Michael and Hannah exchange playful glances, I couldn't shake the question in my mind. Was it possible to still feel this connected after years together? Or was I doomed to live in a quiet, fading love? One Saturday, Hannah invited me to shop for new decor. She wandered through boutiques with infectious excitement, debating between different throw pillows. This one, she asked, holding up a soft blue cushion. It's perfect, I said, though my thoughts were elsewhere. It wasn't about the pillows or the shopping trip. It was the way she spoke about Michael, the small details, the little habits she adored. He always fluffs the pillows after sitting down, she said with a laugh. He says it keeps them looking nice. These were tiny, everyday things, but they were things I longed for. Later, we returned to her house, where Michael was lounging on the couch, a beer in hand, watching a game. How'd it go? He asked, flashing his usual easy smile. Amazing, Hannah said, dropping the bags on the table. Emily has great taste. Michael turned to me. Of course she does. His voice was casual, but there was something in the way he looked at me, something fleeting, almost imperceptible, but enough to make my stomach flip. That night, as I drove home, guilt wrapped around me like a second skin. What was I doing? Michael was Hannah's husband, my best friend's husband. But no matter how much I tried to silence the thoughts, the memory of his voice, the way his eyes met mine, stayed with me. In the weeks that followed, I found myself looking forward to spending time at their house more than I should have. I told myself it was because Hannah was my safe space, my escape from the emptiness at home. But deep down, I knew better. One evening, Hannah called me, her voice bubbling with excitement. Emily, you have to come with us tomorrow. Michael found this little vineyard outside the city. It's a wine tasting and it'll be fun. I hesitated. Are you sure? I don't want to intrude. Don't be ridiculous, she said. Your family. The vineyard was stunning, rolling hills of grapevines stretching endlessly under a brilliant Texas sky. The tasting room had rustic wooden beams, warm lighting, and the rich aroma of aged wine. Hannah swirled her glass, debating flavors, while Michael poured for us. He was as attentive as ever, making sure my glass was full before his own, pulling out chairs, checking if I was comfortable. At one point, While Hannah was deep in conversation with the sommelier, Michael turned to me. You seem quiet tonight. I hesitated, forcing a smile.
I've fine.
He studied me for a moment before speaking again, his voice softer. If you ever need to talk, you know I'm here, right? The way he said it sent a shiver down my spine. It wasn't just the words, it was the way his voice lingered on them, the way his eyes held mine just a second too long. I nodded, unsure if I could trust myself to speak. That night, as I lay awake beside Tom, staring at the ceiling, my mind replayed every glance, every touch, every moment with Michael. It wasn't just loneliness speaking, was it? And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. It started innocently enough. The morning after the vineyard trip, I woke up with Michael's words still lingering in my mind. If you ever need to talk, you know I'm here. Simple, harmless. Except it didn't feel that way. I tried to brush it off, to tell myself that nothing had happened, that I was reading too much into it. But later that week, when I saw Michael's name flash across my phone screen, a strange, unexpected warmth spread through me. He had sent a message. Michael, I just finished that book you recommended. I get why you love it. I stared at the words longer than I should have before replying. Me. Told you it was good.
Michael, we should talk about it sometime.
A casual invitation. Just two friends discussing a book. That's what I told myself. But when he mentioned a small coffee shop downtown, Westwood Coffee, a quiet, tucked-away place lined with second-hand books, I hesitated. Maybe we could meet there, he suggested, his voice light but careful.
I shouldn't have said yes.
But I did. Westwood Coffee was the kind of place I would have fallen in love with if I had discovered it on my own. The scent of freshly ground beans mixed with the warm, nostalgic aroma of aged paper. Mismatched chairs and cozy reading nooks gave it a charm that felt untouched by time. I arrived early, too anxious to sit still. Running my fingers along the spines of worn novels, I pulled down a weathered copy of The Great Gatsby and flipped through the yellowed pages, pretending to read. Emily. His voice was warm, and when I looked up he was standing a few feet away, holding 2 cups of coffee. I wasn't sure what you'd like, so I got you a latte, he said, setting one in front of me. I wrapped my hands around the cup, surprised by the small but thoughtful gesture. It's perfect. We talked for hours. At first it was light, books, music, movies. But as time passed, the conversation deepened. He shared things about his life that I had never heard before, little struggles he kept hidden from the world. And I told him things I hadn't said out loud in years, about Tom, about the loneliness that had become my constant companion. At one point, he leaned back and studied me. You seem lighter today, he said. Lighter? I echoed. He nodded. Like you're not carrying everything alone for once. I swallowed, my throat tightening.
He was right.
Sitting across from him, in that quiet, book-lined cafe, I felt something shift inside me, something I wasn't ready to name. The hours slipped away unnoticed, until the setting sun painted golden streaks across the windows. I glanced at my phone and felt a pang of guilt. I should go, I murmured. Tom's probably wondering where I am. Michael's face remained unreadable, but something flickered in his expression. He smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. Of course. Thanks for coming, Emily. I needed this. So did I. I admitted, the truth heavier than I wanted it to be. As I walked to my car, I told myself it was just coffee. Just conversation. But deep down I knew better. We started meeting more often after that. Sometimes it was lunch. Sometimes it was coffee. Once, we wandered through a bookstore, losing track of time between the shelves. Each time, the lines blurred a little more. I convinced myself it was harmless, that we were simply two people who understood each other. But late at night, when I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, guilt curled around me like smoke. One evening, Hannah called me, her voice full of warmth. Emily, I just wanted to say thanks. Michael's been less stressed lately, and I think spending time with you has helped. Her words struck like a knife. I forced a laugh, choking on the guilt.
I should stop this.
But when Michael asked if I wanted to meet again, I didn't hesitate. Because every moment with him made me feel alive. And I wasn't ready to give that up. The air in Cedar Park was crisp that evening, carrying the faint scent of pine and damp grass. Michael and I walked along the winding paths of the park, our steps slow, unhurried, as if neither of us wanted to reach the end. The sound of cicadas hummed around us, filling the spaces between our words. The pond shimmered under the moonlight as we stopped near the wooden railing. Michael leaned against it, gazing out over the water, his face unreadable. I stood a few feet away, arms wrapped around myself, unsure if I should break the silence. "You've been quiet tonight," he finally said, his voice soft. I hesitated. "I've just been thinking." "About what?" "Everything. About Tom, about Hannah, about us." But I couldn't say that. Instead, I let out a breath and shrugged. Life. Choices. How things change so slowly that you don't notice, until you realize they're nothing like they used to be. Michael turned to me then, his eyes catching the pale glow of the moon. "Emily," he said, stepping closer, "you deserve to be happy. Really happy." His words settled over me, wrapping around the fragile parts of my heart. Then, without thinking, he reached out and took my hand. The warmth of his touch sent a shiver through me. It was light, hesitant, nothing more than the brush of his fingers against mine. But it felt like crossing an invisible line. "You're an incredible person," he continued, his thumb grazing the back of my hand. "Don't let anyone make you feel like you're not." I looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't see Hannah's husband. I didn't see the man who hosted family dinners or made her laugh during game nights. I saw someone who truly saw me. "Michael," I whispered, my voice faltering. He didn't move. He just held my gaze, waiting. For a moment, time stood still. The world outside of this, outside of us, ceased to exist. And then, just as suddenly, he let go. The absence of his touch sent a jolt through me, like stepping back from the edge of something dangerous, but irresistible. "I don't want to complicate your life, Emily," he murmured. I just want you to know you're not alone." I swallowed, my throat tight. "I know." We walked back to the parking lot in silence, the space between us filled with unspoken words. When we reached my car, I turned to him, searching for something to say. "Thank you," I finally whispered. "For what?" "For seeing me." His smile was small, bittersweet. "I always see you, Emily." I got into my car, my hands trembling against the steering wheel. Michael lingered for a moment before walking away. As I drove home, tears burned at the corners of my eyes. But I wasn't crying out of guilt, not yet. It was something else. Relief? Fear? Maybe both. Because in that moment, I had felt something I hadn't in years alive. But when I turned onto my street and saw the glow of my porch light, reality came crashing back. Tom was inside, probably asleep on the couch with the TV still on. And Hannah, sweet, trusting Hannah, had no idea that her husband had held my hand under the moonlight. That night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I realized something terrifying. The line between right and wrong wasn't just blurred anymore. It was gone. The house was tucked away on a quiet, winding road, hidden beneath the shadows of towering oak trees. It was small, unassuming, with peeling white paint and a porch that creaked under the weight of time. It wasn't the kind of place you stumbled upon. It was the kind of place you went to when you needed to disappear. When I stepped inside, Michael was already there, waiting. The air between us felt heavy, thick with unspoken words and the weight of everything we had been avoiding. He gestured toward the couch, his movement slow, almost hesitant, as if he was second-guessing himself. Maybe he was. The living room was sparse, a couch, a coffee table, stacks of papers and books scattered across every surface. It wasn't like the warm, carefully decorated home he shared with Hannah. No, this place felt different. Like an escape. "I don't know why I'm here," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. My fingers curled into fists in my lap, my nails pressing into my skin. Michael sat across from me, elbows on his knees, his hands clasped together. He let out a slow breath before speaking. "You're here because we both needed this." His voice was quiet, but his words carried a weight that settled deep inside my chest. We talked. Not about work, not about books, not about anything small or inconsequential. This was different.
Raw.
"I love Hannah," he said after a long pause.
Idag.
"But sometimes I feel like I've been living the life I was supposed to live, not the one I actually wanted." His honesty was a punch to the stomach, because I knew exactly what he meant. "I used to think love was enough," I whispered. "That if you married the right person, everything else would fall into place. And now," I exhaled shakily, "now I wonder if love just fades, if it becomes something else, something quieter. And if that's enough to build a life on." Michael leaned forward, his gaze searching mine. "You're not invisible, Emily. You deserve to be seen." His words sent a shiver down my spine. And then, before I could stop myself, I reached for his hand. It was reckless. It was wrong. But the second his fingers laced with mine, the second I felt the warmth of his skin against my own, I knew there was no turning back. I kept coming back to that house. Week after week, I found myself on that winding road, driving towards something I couldn't name. The world outside blurred, fading into the background, until all that was left was the quiet space Michael and I created together. We didn't talk about Hannah. We didn't talk about Tom. We just existed. But deep down, I knew it couldn't last. One evening, as the golden light of sunset poured through the window, I finally asked the question that had been gnawing at me for weeks. "What are we doing, Michael?" My voice was barely above a whisper. He didn't answer right away. He just looked at me, his expression unreadable. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice raw. "But I know I don't want to lose this. I don't want to lose you." The words should have made me feel safe. Instead, they filled me with dread. I wasn't just betraying Hannah. I was betraying myself. The call came late at night. I was sitting on the couch, absently staring at the TV, when my phone buzzed. Hannah's name flashed across the screen, and my stomach clenched with an uneasy twist. I hesitated before answering, my fingers tightening around the device. "Hello." My voice was barely above a whisper. At first, there was nothing but silence. Then Hannah spoke, her voice fractured, thick with pain. "How could you, Emily?" The words sliced through me, sharp and unforgiving. I opened my mouth to respond, to explain, but there was nothing I could say that would make this better. Nothing that could erase the betrayal. "I trusted you," she continued, her voice cracking. "You were my best friend." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "Hannah, please." "Don't," she cut me off. "Don't try to justify this. Don't tell me it just happened or that you didn't mean for it to go this far. You knew exactly what you were doing." She was right. The call ended abruptly, the silence that followed heavier than any words she could have spoken. I sat motionless, my phone still clutched in my hand, her voice echoing in my head. The fallout was immediate. Michael moved out the next day. I didn't hear from him. No calls, no texts. And I didn't reach out either. What could we possibly say to each other now? There was no clean way to untangle the mess we had created. Hannah didn't respond to my messages, her silence as final as a locked door. And Tom didn't yell. He didn't demand answers. He just packed a bag and left. The resignation in his eyes was almost worse than anger. It told me he had seen this coming long before I had. And just like that, my life as I knew it was gone. Days blurred into weeks. I drifted through them in a fog, avoiding the places that reminded me of what I had lost. I couldn't step into the coffee shop where Michael and I used to meet. I couldn't drive past Hannah's house without feeling my chest tighten. One afternoon, needing to escape my own mind, I drove to Zilker Park. The lake shimmered under the afternoon sun, and laughter from passing families filled the air. I found a bench near the water and sat there, unmoving, watching the ripples spread across the surface. For the first time, I let myself ask the question I had been avoiding. Was it love? Or was it just loneliness, dressed up as something more? I thought about Michael's words, the way he made me feel seen, the way he made me feel alive. But I also thought about Hannah's voice on the phone, the raw betrayal laced in every syllable. I thought about Tom, how, even in the end, he hadn't fought for me. If it was love, it had come at too high a price. If it was a mistake, it was one I would carry forever. I sat there until the sky shifted from gold to deep blue, until the weight in my chest felt unbearable. As I walked back to my car, I glanced at my reflection in the window. The woman staring back at me looked older, worn, and lost. And for the first time, I truly understood what it meant to regret. Life didn't fall apart all at once. It unraveled slowly, piece by piece, until there was nothing left of the world I had known. The days turned into weeks, then months. The initial shock faded, replaced by a dull, persistent ache that settled deep inside me. I kept expecting the pain to lessen, for time to smooth out the sharp edges of regret. But it didn't. It just lingered, a quiet, suffocating presence. Hannah never spoke to me again. I sent messages, emails, even a handwritten letter, each one left unanswered. I ran into her once, months later, at a grocery store. She saw me, our eyes met, and for a brief moment, I thought she might say something. But instead, she turned and walked away without a word. That hurt more than anything she could have said. Tom never came back. He didn't fight. He didn't ask for explanations. He simply packed his things, signed the divorce papers when they arrived, and disappeared from my life. I never knew if he hated me or if he had just given up on us long before I had. And Michael? For a while, I thought he might come back, that maybe we could find some way to salvage what we had started. But deep down, I knew the truth. We weren't meant to last. One evening, months after everything had fallen apart, I got a message from him. Just one.
Michael, I'm sorry.
That was it. No explanation. No attempt to fix what was broken. Just 2 words, too little and too late. I stared at the screen for a long time, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, trying to decide what to say. In the end, I didn't respond. Because what was there left to say? I spent the following months rebuilding my life, or at least trying to. I moved to a smaller apartment, changed my routine, and kept to myself. I threw myself into work, filling my days with meetings and deadlines, anything to keep my mind from wandering back to what I had lost. But the nights were harder, because at night there was nothing to distract me. At night, I was left alone with my thoughts, with the weight of everything I had destroyed. Sometimes I wondered how things would have turned out if I had made different choices. If I had fought for my marriage instead of walking away. If I had valued Hannah's friendship more than the fleeting moments with Michael. But regret is a pointless thing. It changes nothing. And so, I moved forward, one day at a time, carrying the weight of my choices with me.
Not because I wanted to,
but because there was no other choice. Life didn't fall apart all at once. It unraveled slowly, piece by piece, until there was nothing left of the world I had known. The days turned into weeks, then months. The initial shock faded, replaced by a dull, persistent ache that settled deep inside me. I kept expecting the pain to lessen, for time to smooth out the sharp edges of regret. But it didn't. It just lingered, a quiet, suffocating presence that shadowed me wherever I went. Hannah never spoke to me again. I sent messages, emails, even a handwritten letter, each one left unanswered. I ran into her once, months later, at a grocery store. She saw me, our eyes met, and for a brief moment, I thought she might say something. But instead, she turned and walked away without a word. That hurt more than anything she could have said. I couldn't blame her. She had every right to hate me. I had been her friend, her confidant, the person she had trusted above all others. And I had betrayed her in the worst possible way. No amount of regret could ever erase that. Tom never came back. He didn't fight. He didn't ask for explanations. He simply packed his things, signed the divorce papers when they arrived, and disappeared from my life. I never knew if he hated me, or if he had just given up on us long before I had. Maybe we had both stopped fighting long before Michael ever entered the picture. Maybe we had been lost for years, just too afraid to admit it. But the strangest part? I missed him. Not the distant, disconnected version of him from the last few years, but the man he used to be. The man who brought me flowers just because. The man who held my hand in the middle of a crowded room. The man who, once upon a time, had been my best friend. I hadn't just lost my marriage. I had lost the person I had built my life with. And Michael? For a while, I thought he might come back, that maybe we could find some way to salvage what we had started. But deep down, I knew the truth. We weren't meant to last. We had built something fragile, something born out of loneliness and quiet desperation. One evening, months after everything had fallen apart, I got a message from him. Just one.
Michael, I'm sorry.
That was it. No explanation, no attempt to fix what was broken. Just 2 words, too little and too late. I stared at the screen for a long time, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, trying to decide what to say. In the end, I didn't respond. Because what was there left to say? We had made choices. And those choices had consequences. There was no undoing them. I spent the following months rebuilding my life, or at least trying to. I moved to a smaller apartment, changed my routine, and kept to myself. I threw myself into work, filling my days with meetings and deadlines, anything to keep my mind from wandering back to what I had lost. But the nights were harder, because at night, there was nothing to distract me. At night, I was left alone with my thoughts, with the weight of everything I had destroyed. I took up running. At first, it was just a way to exhaust myself so that I wouldn't have to lie awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every mistake over and over. But over time, it became something more. The rhythmic pounding of my feet against the pavement, the steady inhale and exhale of breath, it was the only thing that made sense in a world that no longer did. One morning after a long run, I stopped by a cafe. Not our cafe. A different one. Far from the places that held ghosts of what had been. I ordered a coffee and sat by the window, watching people pass by, lovers holding hands, friends laughing, strangers lost in thought. And for the first time in a long time, I felt okay. Not happy, not whole, but okay. Because life moves forward. Even when you don't want it to. Even when you feel like you don't deserve it. It moves forward anyway. I still think about Hannah sometimes. About Tom. About Michael. I wonder where they are, if they've found peace, if they've moved on. I hope they have. Because I'm trying to. Not because I want to forget. But because I have to. Because regret is a pointless thing. It changes nothing. And so, I move forward, one day at a time, carrying the weight of my choices with me. Not because I want to, but because there is no other choice. Have you ever woken up and realized that something is missing, something important, but you can't name it? Share your thoughts in the comments. Let's discuss if this story resonated with you. Support the channel, give a like, subscribe, and click on the bell to not miss new episodes. Let's talk about things that really matter.